Welcome everyone. Elena and myself are from Data Theorem. We're going to speak less, and hopefully none, about Data Theorem if I have my way. We really want to talk about programs. So we're lucky to work with a lot of companies, obviously based in California, a lot of tech companies. And one of the things I've seen over the last, lot of years being in security is more about fixing what's right in front of you at that very moment, which is natural and human nature. Versus setting up a program to get this done with minimal time over the course of a day, week, or even year. So the key thing about this slide is here in red. As security people, we love, or we have to look at red, is week. 30 minutes a week, right? And as those of you who are not on the vendor side or on the practitioner side, that might actually be way too much. You might not even have 30 minutes a week to spend on your program. And so as a security vendor, we have to make sure the time we get from an engineer, from an ops analysis is very, very, very useful, right? And we all know issues, alerts, that fatigue is real. So one thing that we try to do as an industry is to make sure let's use the worst case scenario, right? Always train in the worst conditions, which is if we have 30 minutes a week with someone, what can we do? That's what's going to be our presentation. And so one of the things that I'm not going to talk about because I'm on the vendor side, now we work with a lot of large and small companies, is risk. I have a very, very passionate opinion about a risk decision should be made by someone who works for that organization. Now, if you go out there in a vendor hall, maybe even Data Theorem, you'll see the word risk said a lot. I think that's a little bit not appropriate because risk is hard to judge unless you have the context of the data, the business, and the situation, right? And that risk changes almost daily. So if you're looking for a top 10 for risk, you're not going to find it here. So I'm just giving that away now. But it's about what reward you get with 30 minutes a week out of 240 minutes total. So it's a really, really small ratio, but that's the ratio that we want to use to be realistic about what's out there and what's not. And we're going to talk about APIs. So first questions like RESTful APIs, gRPC, GraphQL, yes, 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 even SOAP. How many people are using SOAP? All right, always have one, very good, all right, yeah. The truth, two, yeah. Truth is, of the two people who bravely raised their hand, thank you, there's probably a lot more out there than we want to realize, right? I would probably imagine if your company that you work for sadly is over 10 years old, which I'm sure a lot is, its SOAP is somewhere around there. Hopefully, making a quicker death than we think. But yeah, whatever it is, it's really about the APIs and what we can do. Sorry, let me start my timer so we don't go over. I think we're the last presentation before alcohol, so I want to make sure we don't go too far over. And so when you think about application security, you think about LASCON, you think about what we do, you're going to have an audience that's mostly engineering-based or AppSec-based. And I'm guessing that's what we have here today. What we would like to do is make sure you're involving your security operations center. Now, you don't have to say, hey, you are now the API security program. That's not the point of the talk. But one thing that I have seen, whether it's my API career, my mobile career, and long time ago, I used to do Win32 pen testing. So I'm talking about 98, 99. So it could be a thick client on top of Microsoft. So that dates me a little bit. But the point is that a lot of bugs are going to be identified. They have to be triaged. But what we don't see is them being automated in a central kind of dashboard. Now everyone's going to say, well, what about SIMs? And we see that. But when we talk to our application security counterparts, it really starts diving into pen testing. Like, can we pen test our way to security? The answer is yes and no. It depends on what you want to do. But this presentation is not a top 10 for pen testing. It's really not. And the reason why, all the data breaches, and a lot of vendors have better stats than we do, but all the data breaches that are happening on the application layer, most of them did not happen through Ebola attack, right? Which is probably one of the most popular API attacks out there, or SSRF. Now, the most famous SSRF attack was the attack that Paige Thompson did in 2018, and that was very good. There's a lot of infrastructure things that went wrong as well. So it wasn't just an application attack. So over the years of data theorem and the data that we have, no pun intended, this top 10 is about what we see is not happening from a blocking and tackling perspective that could have prevented data breaches. In fact, the most recent one with T-Mobile, which with 37 million records, was not something that was a Ebola-based attack, but it was authentication. So let's start with number one. So if those of you can't see this, I'll kind of talk about it. The first thing, if you have 30 minutes a week, right? So 2 of those minutes, so let's count down. So I'm taking 30 to 28. What I'd like everyone to do is look at every API today that's open that was locked down yesterday. All right? So here's this 5 out of probably 500 APIs, right? So today is, what's today's date? 29th? No, I don't even know. 24th, sorry. All right, today's 24th, right? 24th of October. Which APIs that are open on the 24th of October, which of those were locked down yesterday? Or in the day before, and the day before, right? So look at the top one. Right now, this is the 2 of the 30 minutes I have today, or this week, right? Why? Why is an API open today when it was locked down on the 22nd, the 21st, the 20th? Maybe there's a reason, maybe there's not. But I have to admit, if you look at the data breaches of 2023, 9 out of 10 of them that are API layer, no one knew the API was open. No one knew the API was leaking data, right? Because we're pen testing, and we should be, but this top area is one of the best, or not best, one of the highest cause for data breaches is that, hey, something was tested, it wasn't working. So what do you do when something's not working and you're an engineer and you're testing something? Exactly, yes. You disable everything you can as quickly as possible, right? And if you're lucky, and most times you are, something will work. So when it works, and we're all technical people, we're all engineers, when it works, what do you do then?
Go on to the next thing.
Yes, yeah, it's like, it's working, don't touch it, go. Like we have 13 other things to do, right? So it's very natural. We're all human, we all do this. I constantly do, and I'm a security person, and I do it all the time. If wireless is not working at home, all right, shut down WPA, shut down all the passwords. I get it working, so we can stream whatever video we wanted to stream. But anyway, point is, so that human nature, the good, if not great criminals out there know this. They know how we behave, they know how busy we are, so they're going out there and they're doing easy stuff. They're not even hacking. I hate the word that they hacked someone. They didn't hack anyone. They found an API that was open. No one else looked. They looked, and then happened to be an API that shouldn't be having all this data, right? So if we just do that, and there's 10 items, it's not that easy, but that gets us 2 minutes of our week is, I'm not saying look at all the open APIs. Remember, not all the open APIs, there's a lot of them. Just the ones that were locked down yesterday that are open today, right? And that's where it comes to program. Vendors like Data Theorem and others will, have solutions of it, but you can't buy your way into a program. You have to develop a process. And this is a process. Like you should get a report. People get reports all the time in the morning. Okay, how many APIs were locked down yesterday and today? And that number should be small. If we all go do this today at our companies, it probably won't be small today, but in a year from now, it should be small. We shouldn't have a lot of APIs going back and forth. If so, we have a process issue, right? So that's number one. Number two, Elena, you want to take number two?
Yeah, so number 2, remove PII from your unauthenticated APIs. Going beyond just what was open yesterday, what is open today that's supposed to be open? Because those endpoints are getting called. Hackers out there are looking at what data is available. So you need to know that you're not unintentionally leaking PII. This could have been added new. This could have been in there from the beginning. But it is out there, and if you're not authenticating that, it's available. So
we all have DLP, right? What does DLP stand for? Exactly. We all know data loss prevention. So we're not that API and DLP should be used together, but what data do we have leaking on the internet? And again, it might say today's date. Today's October 23rd. So that's not sensitive, right? But what if it's right behind you, Elena? What if it's someone's social, right? So what data of open APIs? So we go back and we say, okay, listen, there's an API that was locked down yesterday, it's open today, all right? Okay, so we looked at it, turns out it wasn't a developer testing something, it's legitimate, right? So everything is legitimate, okay? So what data is it leaking? You know, it's leaking what today's data is. Okay, fine, no problem. But again, we're in this room for a reason. What about a year from now? What about a year and a day from now? Guess what? Products change, features change. So yes, this API was blessed as to be secure or non-risky, the risk word. There's no risk to this data, so no big deal. But a year later, did we check it? And that's the other thing I want you to do is like look at that data that's supposed to be open on the internet daily with a simple PII scanner. Like you can write your own, they're all over the place. And you know, socials, it's not gonna always be this easy, as we always know, but there's an easy way to say, hey, of all the data we're leaking to the internet, we should be able to say with a program, it's not sensitive. And we should say that with confidence, right? We shouldn't say, well, I think so, and under our breath, we're like, okay, let's go check, right? It's like, yeah, no, I can say with confidence. Like I got the report, I got my leaky API report was number one, and then all the data, we scanned it, and yes, there's nothing leaking. It's like public data. It's people's, not people's, it's like, you know, just general data we have on the internet. But when, so again, this, the previous one, I kind of skipped ahead. But yeah, this attack, I don't know the details, but you know, we all hear rumors and stuff like that. This was not a hack. Like, it's not, when you disconnect an API and it spills sensitive data, that's luck, right? And I know I'm not hopefully offending anyone, but you know, there are very sophisticated hackers out there, and more power to them. But the point is, this is not a hack. This is someone who just had, you know, something tested out there. It's probably graduated to production years later, 2 years later. No one realized that, hey, it's now production data, not test data, and then bam, we have a problem, right? So all this, if you're an application security engineer, so far is kind of snooze fest. Like, oh my gosh, this is like boring stuff. But this is what a program is. This is what a process is. You want to wake up, you want to see a report that is boring, right? You don't want to see a train wreck every morning. So that's the second thing is all the data your APIs are leaking, just do a quick PII, PFI check on it and make sure it's just things that are supposed to be public. Number three, I'll go through this one quickly because I know you're all doing it. You know, secrets in your code, right? So secret scanning, almost every vendor does it. A lot of it probably wrote your own, which is a good one because the more customized, the better. But definitely do this because not so much of what you're doing now. What we have seen, not often, so it doesn't happen often, but when it happens, it's a train wreck. We'll see keys, valid API tokens in Git repositories. Not supposed to do that, but again, developers have to do their job, especially in Postman. If any of your developers are using Postman, there's all sorts of tokens and keys. And know that Postman's in the cloud now. So your API tokens are actually on the Postman cloud, right? But that's the point of this slide. This one is if those Postman recordings or Git repos ever become public, then we got a data breach, right? So that's the thing, is like, you're not supposed to have secrets in code. We all know that. We scan for that, and plenty of products do that. But if this repo or this Postman recording ever goes public by accident, then we have all these keys out there on the public internet. So that's the third thing in terms of blocking and tackling. 4, Elena.
Number 4, zombie APIs. Sure, you've all had a new version of your app come out, new versions of those APIs. And the old APIs you were using, V1, V2, whatever, are still up there. Now, maybe the app that accessed them is gone. You've buried it once. But if those APIs aren't taken down, then those are still out there, and then you have to double tap to make sure hackers aren't still using those. So look at the APIs you have that are up there. They haven't been used for 90 days, 180 days, that are still accessible. And make sure you're reviewing those so you can take them down and ensure that deprecated APIs that aren't supported and aren't meeting current security practices are not still up there.
Yeah, and this one is a good example of one of the first things, like, so involving your SOC, right? So if you're an application security engineer or a manager or just run an AppSec team or a pen testing team, what our polite call to action is just involve the SOC, and this is a good example. If the SOC says, hey, every SOC can do this, right? And you don't have to have a product do this. So you can see here, well, maybe you can't, so I'll say it. The last two APIs, the last call to them was October 19th and October 2nd, right? So no problem there, right? The first three, there's been no call for 20 days, 41 days, and 41 days. That's still not a problem. That doesn't concern me as a program person, right? But if those are now in the hundreds, an API has not been called for 300 days, your SOC, someone should turn that off, right? And then one could say, well, and I'm like, no, like, come on, like 300 days, like a year, and yes, we can get in trouble, but what's the opposite? We leave it on. What happens if you leave a zombie or what sometimes orphan API on? People forget about it, and if people forget about it, there's no security on it. If there's no security on it, bam, we have a problem, right? So all this stuff, you can see it's very, very, like 10 simple things. It'd be great if there's one, probably 20, but the point is, the thing is, 20, 41, 41, not a big deal, but if those numbers become in the hundreds, that's where we have to say, as a program, as a policy, whatever boring word we want to say, we're going to say, if your API has not been called for a year, 365 days, we're taking it down. Someone will say, how is that a security problem? What vulnerabilities are there? Well, like, doesn't matter. Like, you're not using it. Reduce our attack surface. If there's no reason to have it up, it's less things for us to worry about, right? And so zombie APIs, you're going to get pushback on turning them down, but you have to say, hey, why have that up? Why have it up as someone to forget about? Because if it's not been called for 365 days, whatever app was using it has probably been retired, right? So why have that API out there exposed? Question?
We implemented something where at 100 days, we got an alert if it got called. That way, when we went to shut it down, we have a little more confidence.
Nice. Yeah, that's perfect. So yeah, the comment is after 100 days, so even more aggressive than 365. But those types of things, as we all know, I'm not a headline guy, but I had to put one in there. Those types of things, what we've seen is the root cause of many issues, right? So these articles, they love to make fun of the security team or the company, and that's fine, they're journalists. But the point is, 10 years ago, if I can date myself, going into the VP of engineering and telling him or her to shut something down that's not used, they would win the argument because they would say one thing, hey, it's producing revenue, right? And revenue versus security, what wins? Revenue all the time, right? But now it's like, listen, if it's not being used, and yes, there's revenue, but if there's no one using it, that same is not true anymore. So now as a security community, we have data to go and say, yes, VP of engineering, you say there's revenue to it, but we have data that shows, no, we don't. No one's using it. So we got to shut it down, right? So zombie APIs, orphan APIs, whatever you call it, is a big part of it. I skipped over. So I already talked about number 5. So number 5 and number 2 are that kind of same thing, public Postman recordings. How many of your organizations are using Postman? All right, so about 40, 50%. Okay, so Postman is very popular from the engineering community, and there's a reason for it. It makes their life easier. They actually have a small security part of their product as well. It's very small, but the thing about Postman is you gotta chase it, right? You gotta figure out what's going on because there are keys in your Postman recording. Now, as a business model, those keys are now on the Postman cloud, so someone has to approve that. But that's not the purpose of item number 5. The item number 5, if those Postman recordings are shared or made public, those keys within those recordings are now out of your control, right? And that's a subtle thing. And yes, all this is based on data. All this has happened, right? So we had a customer, their Postman recordings became public. The developer, to their defense, didn't even realize they were public. Like, it's not something in the UI you see a lot because these are developer tools, not security tools. So make sure if you're using a Postman, honestly, encourage your developers to use it if they want it. Don't take it away, but make sure you're looking for which recordings are public, and it should be next to 0, right? It should be all within your organization. Even if they say it's test, because if it's test today, is it not test tomorrow? If it's test today, are you using production API keys? Yes or no? Like all these things, different nuances, but the point is make sure you don't have any public Postman recordings because those recordings, even if they don't have keys today, again, tomorrow they could. But there's no real reason to have a public Postman recording in an enterprise license. All right. Elena, you want to take basic auth? This is kind of a well-known one, but good still to mention.
Yeah, so going from basic auth to OAuth 2. So kind of a no-brainer nowadays. Basic auth is in the name. It's pretty basic. Username, password, a lot of ways for hackers to get through that. Especially username, it's pretty much someone's email nowadays. So as a security measure, moving to OAuth 2 does a lot to improve the security of your APIs. You're going to start using two-factor, check in with SAML, whatever auth systems you have behind there. But all of a sudden, those hackers are not able to just figure out someone's username and password and get through it.
Yeah, and this kind of combines with item number 7. These are the obvious stuff, but yeah, not all of it is going to be leaky or PII, but the amount of APIs we're still seeing with basic auth is unacceptable, right? Same thing with the amount of APIs not using TLS 1.2 is unacceptable, right? Now this is a laundry list of to-dos. In a large organization, it's like a year effort, but we do think it needs to be started, right? Basic auth should not be used. Anything below TLS 1.2 should not be used. Now, unlike these first couple, they're not going to root into a data breach. Like this could be a data breach, leaky APIs. This could be a data breach. Obviously, this one in a micro sense is, but they're not all that severe. When it comes to authentication and encryption, OAuth and TLS 1.2, and you want to scorecard it as well. So going back to program, people love scorecards, right? So if you can score your APIs, if our APIs are supporting TLS 1.3, 1.2, but you can notice in this example, it's supporting other things. Now, when I was much younger and I was only doing red team stuff, this to me, it's not the driver of the presentation, but this to me shows signals of no one, what's the word I want to say? Signals of weakness, right? So if I see an API that's using basic auth, I don't know if I can hack it, but I definitely know someone is not taking care of this API, right? It gives me a signal that someone kind of fell asleep or someone doesn't care about this API. Because normally any person in this room would say, no, you're not using basic auth. You're not using TLS 1.0. Are you kidding me? Like, no way. So when you have this up against an attacker, this shows to me like, oh, maybe you want to spend more time on this API because the basics aren't done. No pun intended. The basics aren't done. So if the basics aren't done, are they doing authorization correctly? Now going back to BOLA, which I think is going to be our next slide, but when you look at authorizations on APIs, it is hard, right? And that's why BOLA, basically authorization bypass attacks, that's why they're always successful because they're really hard to architect against. But if I see the basics with TLS and authentication not being done, as an attacker, I'm going to go after those APIs first for an authorization bypass attack because I think this is not getting the attention it needs. Now, one might say, well, the reason why it's not getting attention is because there's no sensitive data behind it. And that could be true, but you never want to signal weakness, right? And these are two things that are, any scanner can find this. Now, it will take time to fix, which is why the presentation is called program. So not all of this, if not most of it, is not overnight, but slowly you want to remove things that you just never want to see with authentication and encryption. All right, number 8, rate limiting. This is kind of obvious, but still important to talk about. Elena, you want to take this one, or I can jump in a second? Oh, okay, I'll take it. So this one is like monitor your API. So going back to the SOC, you might be pen testing them. You're probably doing a security scan of its code, good and good. But you want to kind of see the monitoring, the runtime aspects of the API, and what weird stuff happens, right? So the first example is a sudden surge. There's like, by the way, 50 of these, right? So it's not just 3. But if you're monitoring your APIs, a sudden surge in API requests, that's weird, right? Someone should be known about it. Doesn't mean we open a JIRA ticket. Doesn't mean we go out there and start knocking on VP of Engineering's door, but we should look at that, like why all of a sudden we get a surge. Now, I don't like doing this, but I'm using a subjective term, surge. What does that mean? Well, you have to have, 3-6 months of data, and then you define surge. So if we started a program today, this would not be one of the things we look at because we don't know what normal looks like. So figure out what normal looks like, 3, 6 months, whatever the right time is, and then if you see a surge, unless it's what's the day after Thanksgiving? Black Friday. Unless you're like online retailer where you're going to see a surge on Black Friday or Cyber Monday, you shouldn't see a lot of strange surges in your business unless you're like selling things online. So that's the first one. Low reputation IPs. This sounds so boring, and it is, but it works. I promise you, it works. Low reputation IDs. We are 2024. Believe it or not, I started my security career way before, or not way before, when 2000s were around. So the point is, we as an industry have a lot of sources. Many of them are free and organized where the reputation of IP is out there, right? Now, it might change a lot, but you can go out and get sources of what source IPs are touching our network and what their reputation is. Put that on your APIs. Your network people have been doing that forever. And a lot of people who probably have an application-specific SOC are doing that now, but do that. Go talk to your network engineers, and they'll be like, oh yeah, we've done that forever. So bring that data to your APIs. So who's calling our API from a low reputation source IP? And I'm not saying block them, but I kid you not, you'll probably start blocking them. Like why? And they might be even linking with their first one, right? But you'll be amazed how much attack traffic you can get rid of from sources that are not trusted, right? So that second one, while sounds boring, and it really is highly, highly effective when you're running an AppSec program. And then this one is again Captain Obvious. Large amount of data downloaded. That's unusual. Like all of a sudden, again, what is large, right? So again, as an industry, when we use subjective terms, it's a weakness because it's hard to kind of quantify that. When you train or you learn about the data and you can define small, medium, large, you want to say why all of a sudden on September 19th, something was exported in way more volume than we've ever seen before, right? So sadly, if you have this trigger, you might go down a path that's uncomfortable, which it could have been a data breach. So as we all know, if you've been on the other side, and sadly probably we all have, you find out about a data breach afterwards, right? And this is one of the signals that, hey, why did this happen? And you figure out, you start asking questions, and like all of a sudden you saw a large amount of data from an unknown source or from some kind of hacker activity. So this one is obvious, but if you put it into your SOC, you might find stuff that you don't want, but you got to find it before obviously someone else does. And this one sounds very boring, and it is, but it's very valuable if you put that onto your API stack as well. All right, let's go to the next one. This one's fun. Number 9. So this one's kind of like going back to basic auth. Again, this all comes from data, right? The whole presentation is from data. I don't know why delete is such a, it's not a popular method, but why is it there? Like, who wants to allow a API client to delete something server-side? Really, the popular kids in town are get, post, and sometimes put, right? So why do we have delete? Like, why are we even exposing? Like, well, if you look at the data and see how many times delete is successful, it's not a lot. But my argument is, why is it there in the first place? Why put ourselves out there? Why allow someone to potentially delete data via an API when we don't have a feature necessarily attached to it, right? Now, this all comes from, again, our experience. So delete and put, I would argue, probably don't need to be there. It's not, it's not number 1 on this list. You can see it's towards the end, number 9. But I would say if you're going to have a program, this is one of the basics of the program. Just eliminate the attack surface. So going back to eliminating the methods aren't being used, and eliminating zombie APIs, orphan APIs, just reducing the attack surface as much as possible. Yep. And number 10, yes.
Getting into the actual hacks. I mean, BOLA, IDOR, SSRF, These, I mean, you have red teams and pen testing people going through and testing these. But even with that, they slip through the cracks pretty frequently. Developers just want their features to work. You put in the ID for that customer, you're authenticated, looks like it's working. But, and not to name any specific financial companies that this may have happened to, it's pretty easy for something like an iDoor, where you just put in customer ID equals X123, and that goes straight to them without any authentication needed. You want to make sure that as part of your program, your APIs are all being tested for these consistently. You want to make sure there's no BOLAs, there's no iDoors, and SSRF, especially with the Paige Thompson attack, isn't out there there to bite you.
Yeah, and so this is kind of like summarizes the presentation. Like when we look about API security, at least when we get asked about it, it's static analysis, dynamic analysis, runtime analysis, Jira, GitHub, GitLab, all these plugins. And this is good. BOLA is important. iDoor, SSRF, important. So that's when it's like, let the hackers hack, let the pen testers pen test. But my ask of all of you, start introducing the program part of API to your SOC, right? So meaning that you will have a BOLA attack, right? But in my experience, item 1 or 2 will be the cause of the data breach. It won't be BOLA. And that's right now. It could change, but what I've seen, whether it's a big name company or a small name, someone had an API that was leaking data and no one knew because the day before it was authenticated. And then, or someone had an API that they knew was unauthenticated. It wasn't a big deal, but they didn't know the data it was leaking was sensitive, right? So if you compare 1 or 2 and you say that's for the SOC and the rest is for the AppSec team, I have no problem with that, but what I see out there is the absence of SOC. Right? No one is saying, hey, you've been looking at our network for a decade, you're looking at applications for a decade, but who's taking that API sensory data and saying, hey, if you ever see an API that even has basic auth, something is basic auth, and all of a sudden it doesn't, right? Basically you see whatever chart you have at home, whatever form of this chart, you just see this. I worry more about this in terms of program than item number 10. Because we have a lot of, as a community, as an AppSec community, we have a lot of resources going towards this, and it's good. Keep on doing it, but we don't have a lot of resources going through the basics. And right now, if I can date myself, API security and its breaches are really at the infancy. There's nothing sophisticated happening out there. It's really basic stuff. And so it's kind of like web apps in 2004, where cross-site scripting, SQL injection, right? In 2004, oh my gosh, it's just like everywhere, right? Now, if you do a SQL injection attack, I applaud you because not only you're skilled, it's like it's really hard to pull off, right? So, but we're in the infancy of APIs, and the criminals or the hobbyists or whoever's doing this, they're getting away with data with very low-tech methods because we're not having a program built for a SOC to be alerted on versus the pen testing of APIs, which again is good, but there's also a lot more things than that. So in summary, everything in pink or purple are things that we think should be for the SOC, right? Security Operations Center with an API aspect of it, right? Most SOCs probably have tons of this from network, so we're politely asking if I have one takeaway for you all, it's really just number 1. It's not even all 9, right? Had to make a 30-minute presentation, so I couldn't do that on just one thing. But I'm like, if I can go back and say, hey, I just want to report of everyone uses the house analogy, right? But if you own a house or an apartment, and someone say, okay, every morning I'm going to tell you what door or window of your house is open, right? And we all can say, last night when I went to bed, all the doors were locked. Well, I live in the United States. I hear Canadians don't lock their doors. But let's pretend we're all all the doors are locked and all the windows are locked, right? So in the morning, my report should say 0. It should be a half a second analysis, right? So that same analogy. But if someone says, hey, the back door was open, right? It's like, hey, no, wow, that shouldn't happen. But nothing was stolen. Okay, fine. But who left the back door open? Who left the window open? Like, that's not good practice. So same thing on API. So item number 1, if you all can put that into your program, I think you'll be one step ahead not one step ahead, one step closer from the basic issues not being vulnerable to your company, right? And then the other 2 and 3 can follow along, but I kid you not, number 1 and number 2, as boring as they sound, are so critical to an API program. And not to say Bola is way more interesting, by the way, and way more sophisticated, but some of the things, a lot of these things we see are just basic that, hey, leaky API or API leaking data was the root cause of everything. That kind of repeats what I just said. So what we do for our customers, I'm sure you do it for your in-house teams, is build AppSec KPIs for the SOC. So you can see the open issues is always high, which means it's going to be ignored. But what we want to do is like, how many leaks did we find? So how many windows, were open and did we close them? How many API secrets? So build KPIs for the SOC so they can be measured. If it's measured, I think I have that as my, if it's measured, it will happen, right? So that's to summarize everything. The measurement of API security within your SOC is absent in the community. And that's what we would like to see more of that. If we go to the SOC and say, start measuring the authentication of the API, the authorization, the encryption, then we'll start seeing things we don't like, and then we can start tackling them. And the first one is, honestly, what APIs were open that were once locked down. And that's about it. I think we got a couple minutes for questions. Yeah?
Why the SOC instead of the AppSec team?
Well, it's a good question. So the question is, why the SOC instead of the AppSec team? It could be the AppSec team. In our experience, the AppSec team are either existing or ex-pen testers, or existing or ex-developers, or someone's writing the code. And we love them, and we work a lot with them. That's mostly our interface. But they're not people who, they don't wake up and look at reports and say, okay, what was open that was now what's closed. So that's what we're it's more program and operation, and the SOC is set up for that. So if we can get the SOC involved on leaky APIs or APIs leaking data, because the AppSec people are coming from the engineering perspective, where the SOC is coming in from the operational side. But it could be one big team, but the ones we've worked with, it's kind of 2 separate teams.
I'm actually curious. I was going to ask a slightly different version of that question, which is why SOC and not SRE? Because what I've found is that SOC tend to be much more focused on corporate and lack the skills and context of working with developers on API design, whereas SRE seems to be the right balance.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a good point. So the question was, why not SOC, why not SRE? Site reliability engineer versus SOC, it could be them. Yeah, whoever can understand, if you, in my day, when you're looking at the network, what we would look at is ports, right? 3389, anyone? Yeah, there you go, all right. So 3389, RDP, so RDP remote desktop. So if you're trying to hack an organization and you see 3389 open, oh my gosh, you're just so happy. It's just a matter of time before you hack them, right? So when you look at networks, you look at ports, and that used to be the SOC. So the equivalent of that could be SRE. So yeah, whoever is just looking at the data to look for 3389, or in this case, a leaky API. But there's teams there that are doing it now. We wanted to get into those teams. But the application security team seems to be application developer rooted. So we just want to make sure we're not asking them to do something that's not their day-to-day flow.
To elaborate on his question and my question, do you feel the SOC has the skill set that makes sense so that they understand who to talk to and how to get the thing turned off and all that?
Yeah, good question. The question is, does the SOC have the skill set? The answer is no. And that's probably, they do not, which is why you got to simplify it, right? It's just if we say all these API acronyms, REST, gRPC, GraphQL, they're don't care about that. Stop talking to me, right? But if we say, hey, can you just tell me of all this list, what is now open? Open, close, they can get. If we make it that simple, I think they're the best organization to run the program. But you're right, they don't speak applications, right? So that will be definitely a challenge. But I think that's why we see all these basic attacks. They're well, RDP wasn't open, Telnet wasn't open, FTP wasn't open. They speak in protocols, and we speak in software languages, right? So that's where the big disconnect happens. Oh, that's a good point. I think there was a question. Oh, right there.
I don't feel like SOCs that generally don't look at this stuff would be equipped to easily go answer those questions and examine the things you're saying to look at? Do you think it's going to require getting them a bunch of new tools?
I don't think it doesn't necessarily have to be new tools. Now, a lot of tools do this, but it depends on how. Yeah, I think if I read the question correctly, who can build this? Like someone from the AppSec team or a vendor. I don't want to do vendor promotion here, but someone has to build it. The SOC won't build it, and I think
that was my question.
Yeah.
Like, do you think they already have stuff that could do it, or they would need to be equipped before you could even have the conversation?
Well, honestly, I do think they have the data to do it. Like, but someone has to show them that, right? They have the data. You know, all SOCs have so much data. They have application level data. They're just not using it. So, but someone has to build that. Like, okay, this is what I want to see in the application, and that could be a vendor, that could be an internal AppSec engineer. But yeah, someone has to build that and connect those dots. But the data they have, that's the good part. But they don't know really how to kind of make that data simple where I get a report saying open and closed, right? That's where they need the application security team to come in and build that for them, or maybe a vendor partner that can do that as well.
If I can offer a third path.
Oh, yeah.
Have the SOC grant access to the AppSec team such that they can build what they want from the reporting, and then get the alerts rather than the SOC having to intervene and tell you the API has been dead for 100 days. If you guys are getting those reports, you're getting them faster, and you're more able to action on them. Yeah,
if the AppSec team, so I agree with all that. If the AppSec team, and I think this was maybe what the woman was alluding to, if your AppSec team does have monitoring in your organization, I agree with that, right? A lot of ones we work with, just really engineering focused, and the monitoring is a different team. But if that team, like application security is, code reviews and application management, I guess ASPM is the new hot buzzword, that would be a good signal. We just want to make sure it's someone's normal day-to-day business to watch the traffic. Like whoever's doing that, but it can't be someone who's like, oh, I answer Jira tickets. Like that's a developer kind of ticketing system. That person is not the right person because they'll do it for a week or a month, but we need someone looking at that every day, right? All right. Any other questions? I know it's hot in here, so thanks for everyone. I don't know how it got so hot within a half hour, but thanks for sticking around. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time. We'll be around if you have any other questions. Otherwise, have a good rest of your day.